Hey everybody, so I do have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is, yeah, you hear my voice, I'm a bit under the weather. But the worst news is that if you came expecting a normal over-under, then you're going to be severely disappointed. I did the math and I got just 16 out of the 36 over-unders that I made this season. That's good for 44%. So instead of playing a losing game as a way to facilitate the information that you need for this weekend, I've got a few things up my sleeve to help with this preview. First, let's set the stage. The Empire downed the DC Breeze 19-18 at home on a buzzer beater from Ben Yot on his 30th birthday nonetheless, catching a crossfield backhand from Jack Williams just as time expired in regulation, sending the Empire to their fourth championship weekend in a row. They also head into championship weekend undefeated for the second time in 3 seasons, and standing in their way is arguably the best 2 seed, 3 seed, and 4 seed at championship weekend that we have ever seen, whether it's Chicago, Colorado, or Carolina. All of these teams lost just 1 game this year. And the storylines really write themselves. In one semifinal, it's the Empire again taking on the Flyers for the 4th time in 2 seasons and a rematch of last year's championship game. And you know, as part of this preview, I was going to do a top 10 players to watch over the whole weekend from all 4 teams, but then I thought, well, maybe it's just for each matchup. But then I started to look at these teams, and all 4 of these squads are so deep, I couldn't even pick 10 from each team. Now in sports, we have weird categories for different players. What's a superstar to a star? What makes a player a star? But for me on Carolina, this is just me judging these names. They have so many players I would classify as borderline stars in the AUDL. It was Anders Jungst in the South Division final, coming back from an injury that he suffered all the way in May at the start of the season and lighting things up against Austin. But it's not just him. I could see any of Alex Davis, Jacob Fairfax, Henry Fisher, Terrence Mitchell, Eric Taylor, Matthew Johannes, Sol Yannick, Charlie McCutcheon, Seth Weaver, Elijah Long, or Suraj Madaraju being the thumbnail on YouTube of that game. And by the way, that's not 10 players, that's 12 players for the Carolina Flyers. And it is hard to believe, but yeah, I'm a bit biased here, but I think the Empire are even deeper than maybe the other 3 teams at championship weekend. The even stronger argument is this Empire team is deeper than they were a season ago when they fell in that championship game. Ryan Osgar, Ben Yot, Solomon Royce-Meyer-Bailey, John Randolph, Ryan Drost, Mike Drost, Elliot Chartok, Ben Katz, Charles Weinberg, John Lithio, Jack Williams, Antoine Davis, Marquez Brownlee, Jabron Meeser, Jeff Babbitt, Ethan Fortin. Did I name the whole team yet? Because any of those names are some of the first names that you mentioned with so many of the other teams in this league. That's the depth that the Empire have. And you've heard a ton from me this season, and I think Empire co-owner Paul Stevens said it a bit better. Everyone else is chasing a championship. We're chasing history. 2 15-0 seasons. I like chasing history. So that pretty much sums up how the ownership of the Empire view this weekend. But from the player's perspective, let's hear from one of those guys that could make history happen for the Empire. And now to help me preview the Empire's path to the championship is none other than Ryan Osgar. Welcome back to the show, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Ryan, before we look ahead to the weekend, I want to know what the first back and forth of more than let's go and celebration was with your roommate and teammate Ben Yot after he caught the game winner against DC on his 30th birthday.
I mean, it was just relief, honestly. It was awesome. It's kind of a stressful game there towards the end. I think we all had a lot of confidence still, and it's pretty awesome for Ben to get that grab. And it's pretty funny, I think, because I had a very similar situation happen to me last year. And so I know how amazing it feels to secure that last pass and win the game in that fashion. It's nothing really like it. But yeah, there's just like giving the big dude a hug, honestly. That was kind of my first reaction back to it.
I mean, you played with him in Minnesota too, and I don't know how it's possible that he had never caught a buzzer beater before.
I mean, they just don't happen that often. That's kind of the main thing, I think, is like how many games have there been like that? Not that many. So, and rarely is it just like a clean sky like Ben got. I mean, it wasn't even really a sky. It was just kind of like a misread by everyone, and then Ben was just in the perfect spot, right? And I feel like most of these like buzzer beater catches like that are generally that way. It's rarely like the dude in the center of the pile who catches it. It's always like the person in the off who's kind of like off a lot of the time. and Ben just happened to be in the perfect spot. Like if you watch the film, you'll see that he sprints from like very far away and gets in the very back. I feel like Ben generally is kind of like in the center of all the action because he's super tall and he's trying to make that play. But he wasn't this time, so it soared over everyone's head, kind of like it does a lot of the time, and then he got it. I mean, Ben has probably caught a bunch of like end of quarters, just not game winners. So
a ton. You're right. Him and Jeff Babbitt, it's like eating candy for those two, of course.
Yeah.
You and Jack having the one against DC last year, you having the one against Atlanta last year, and then I think even this season, Joe Richards getting the one that really really tight one a few weeks ago, and against Philadelphia, and I think buzzer beaters, they're a dime a dozen, but in the biggest moments, it's the big players that come up and make them. And I think, being a 6'7" guy who can read well a crossfield throw from Jack Williams, made it happen. So, I know the players in the Empire, and most significantly, you don't care about individual awards. I know it's a fruitless task to try to ask you, but while I'm not sure who it may be, I'm not telling you to campaign for yourself. Do you think the AUDL MVP is coming from the only undefeated regular season team in the league this year?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I don't really know who it's up to, and I don't really know what their criteria is. It's a kind of a subjective award, in my opinion. And, I don't think certainly no one on the Empire is trying to win any sort of individual award. Coming into championship weekend, we're all, we have a game plan. We all have a role, and we're going to try to execute on that role. I think people think of MVP as someone who's going to take over and do the most at any one point, but that's not always what your role is. So depending on the matchup, depending on the game, you got to do your best as a player to do what's best for the team. So, I almost hope that no one from the Empire wins MVP, because I think that our game plan is going to be not single threaded. It's going to be, for, like I said, people to do their role. And hopefully, if that goes to plan, it will look boring. No one individual will have to have a heroic performance to win. So I would say I hope no one from Empire wins MVP.
Well, even on the Empire, I asked some of your teammates, who is the Empire MVP? Even the Empire MVP, not the AUDL MVP. And I hear your name. I hear Yacht's name. I hear Babbitt's name. Not many are saying Jack's name, but Jack Williams does exist and did win a gold medal halfway through the season. He's a pretty good player. So there are so many different players, even on your team, amongst your team, who aren't really sure who's that leading light. And I think that certainly has been something that has, as you said, galvanized your team and made it more of a unit, where Ben Yacht, two-time MVP, 6 games into the season, is willing to play on the D-line after putting together arguably the 3 best years of offensive production that the league has ever seen. What conversation did you have with him? I know that it wasn't up to you as not being a captain, but what conversation did you have with him about that switch?
It's just so funny to hear everyone say, like, Ben Yacht was willing to play D-line. Like it would be something that Ben would ever be like, no, like,
of course.
It's just funny. Like everyone said, like the narrative this year is like, oh, Ben, he's an amazing offensive player and he's just willing to go play D-line. I think it just like really misrepresents like how Ben thinks about the team and the game. Like he wants to do what's best for the team, and he's willing to do the role that's required of him. So it wasn't so much like he had a choice necessarily, because he got orders and he follows them, so my conversations with him were just like, how do you feel about this? Like, what do you think? And of course he was immediately like, I'm totally on board. This makes sense. And I want to give it a try. So it was pretty frictionless, honestly. And I think the decision made a lot of sense at the time. And I think it still is very good. And you can see Ben still crossing over and playing on O-line when it makes sense for him to do so. I think that it's proven to give us another level of, I don't know, just like dynamic playmaking on the D-line. So I think we all knew that from the beginning, and Ben was very on board with it.
I mean, even when the lights get brightest, looking against DC, we know that Ben Yacht is probably going to play a little bit of O-line. He's going to play the end of quarter O or D points, right? Ben Yacht is going to likely play the most points of anybody at championship weekend if the Empire play in 2 games. So it's not like, yes, for Ben Yacht to play on the D-line is one thing, but to understand that, again, when the lights get brightest, the Empire quote unquote stars are those who do rack up the most points and do get opportunities on O-line and D-line, but it's not even O-line, D-line. As you said, it's very situational. The Empire has two coaches for managing all those situations throughout a game. It's not just even, I've been corrected many, many times and tried to help others correct that there isn't a D1 or D2 that Empire don't set it up that way. There's names for different D-lines in different quarters, even in different situations and for different matchups, and it'll change throughout the game. So I have been told, though, back to you and talking about Yacht by multiple teammates, that the two of you have been two of the primary conductors of the We Want That Championship train this season. Is there anything different about the approach last year to this year?
I think probably the biggest difference I would say is general focus and intensity in and outside of practice. I think that, it stings to lose in the way that we did last year. It's a close game and we lost. And I think we all felt that we left a little bit on the table and we didn't give it our all year, or we could have given more probably in practice and outside. So I think there's been a lot more working out and focusing on fitness and just like being dialed in outside of practice. And then in practice, I definitely think that the intensity of practice has increased from last year to this. And I think another part of why that is because our team has significantly more depth, I would argue, this year as opposed to last. So it just makes everything that much more competitive in everything that we do. So I think that's a big reason why the intensity has risen since last year.
Yeah, and going into this season, we were wondering on that O-line, the step forward that John Lithgow might take, that Solomon Bailey might take, that even Elliot Chartok having a little bit of some struggles and some injuries in the latter half of the playoffs last year, how he would rebound and what that would look like. Again, Jack being Jack. Could Jack be Jack is always that big question, right? And how often can he be Jack? And the answer is Jack is usually Jack. But as far as that O-line putting it all together, then adding Jeff Babbitt halfway through as well, what kind of chemistry was built and what kind of even improvements did you see, even the smallest details with that O-line chemistry this season?
Yeah, I think that I definitely think that Elliot and Saul having another year under their belt playing together has really paid off. They've been extremely excellent this year at maintaining the possession and moving the disc effectively. So last year we had a little bit of flipping around people who were in the handler role. We weren't really decisive about who was going to be in those roles throughout the majority of the season last year, which was pretty frustrating, honestly. It would have been probably pretty nice to have that figured out early and then just build that chemistry because it is very important. And I think that we really have a lot of trust in Saul and Elliot. I think they're both really, really incredible players, and they're gamers, and they're gonna work hard and do what they need to do when the moment is there. And we all have that trust in them. And then as far as like John goes, John's kind of like a android robot guy. Like he just will do the right thing, right, without question. And I think he played amazing last year, honestly, and I think he's playing equally amazing this year. I would say that John's been more dynamic this year, though, as a player. He's been more willing to be around the disc and to make challenging throws and challenging spots. So that's what I would say. And I don't think it's because his skills have dramatically increased. I think he probably has increased, as anyone does over the course of a year, but I think he's just gotten more comfortable doing it in the big moments. And he's proven that he can do that.
Yeah, comfortable, confident for sure. I mean, that layout against DC, just a huge moment in a huge game and coming up big. And as you said, just comfortable more with the disc, with his teammates, with I think it started even down in Colombia when he threw the overtime winner. And, I think there are people outside the Empire sphere kind of questioning, saying, oh, John Lithgow threw up this big throw in the preseason, but that's something that we've now seen carry over to the regular season all year long. So speaking of championship weekend now, we won't talk about Chicago or Colorado because first up for you is Carolina. Have you been waiting for that rematch?
Yes. I think we all knew we were going to play them at some point this year. It was either going to be this game or the championship game. We all had it kind of circled on our calendar. So it's all been building to this moment really for us. And so it's a lot of pressure, but that's what makes it very exciting.
Well, and obviously for you, you've got to know a huge contingent of the Flyers through your club commitments, including winning a national championship last year. So does that make this matchup this season any different? And I mean, did you have any, I mean, not to say that Jack can't handle a lot of that scout. And also the other thing too, I mean, I've seen these players, whether it was they're doing their thing at UNC or whether it's their club commitments or watching Flyers game. I mean, there's a lot of tape of a lot of these players, with the exception, I think, this year of Anders Jungst, who's been hurt since May and just returned. And now they look entirely different for the playoffs, though.
Yeah, I mean, it is an exciting thing because it's like I know all these guys, and a lot of them, the vast majority of them, I would consider my friends, and I'm going to be playing with them again this club season. So it's a pretty weird dynamic, honestly, because generally people, generally you don't really know the people you're playing against super well. For me, I don't know if I've played in a game with like this much crossover of people who I'm friends with, like at this moment in time, especially. So it's really interesting. I think it's only going to make it more fun too, because I can imagine there'll be some good banter on the field. And we're playing for a lot, I feel like I'm the most competitive when I'm playing against my friends a lot of the time. So I think it's going to be a really special game for me personally. And I think in general, it's just going to be an extremely competitive game.
All right. So I want a little more than win 2 more games with these last 2 questions here. So I do want you to fill in the blank for me. The Empire win the 2022 AUDL title if the offense, so then we'll do defense next, but if the offense does fill in the blank, the Empire win the 2022 AUDL title.
I would say, we win if we play at 90% as good as we can play. So I don't think there's any expectation for us to play perfectly, but we will have to play very clean to win these games. We're going to have low turnover games. We're going to have to execute. We know it's going to be a grind. We're going to have to work extremely hard to win these games. But I think if we can, push through that pressure and push through the adversity and keep turnovers low and stay composed a little bit better than we did against DC, then I think we'll come out as the victors.
Yeah, this seems to be the Empire. I mean, there are numbers, there are thresholds that if the Empire have less than 10 turnovers, usually your team wins. If you're 4 or 5 or you're 10 of 11 on your hucks, usually the Empire win. If they've, that being the defense now, I'll let you handle this one. So the Empire win the 2022 AUDL title if the defense.
Yeah, I think if the defense can punch in 4 breaks, I think we win.
For each in each of the games.
Yeah, in each of the games.
And that has also seemed to be the special number for the Empire as well. 3 being the one where maybe because it matches that, but yeah, 4 seems to be the magic number.
Yeah. I have a lot of confidence in our offense to convert and make minimal mistakes, especially in these games where we have very, very good game plans going in. I feel very confident in our game plans going into these games, specifically Raleigh. We've thought about the following game, but for the most part, we were thinking most heavily about Raleigh right now. So I feel very confident in our game plan going into that. So I think, we're going to have a really good chance to, hold at a high percentage. And if we can get the disc away from them a couple times and punch it in, I think if you look back at our game last year against them in the finals, I think we only broke once. That's a tough game to win. You gotta break a couple times, because no matter how good your offense is, you're not going to be perfect. It's basically impossible to do that over the course of a long game. So we have to recognize that, some mistakes will happen and trust our defense to have our backs. And I know they will. They've had it all year. They've arguably been the best, like the better of the offense and defense. Like they're arguably the reason we're as good as we are. So we have a lot of trust in them. And I know they're gonna get us those breaks when we need them.
And lastly, for you now, championship weekend is in Madison again. So, and for you, this is now your second championship weekend, sure. But being a former Minnesota player, you're kind of familiar with Madison, but now it's a different atmosphere there. So what are you looking forward to, let's say, returning to your old stomping grounds?
Well, first thing, I'm just kind of excited that I looked at the weather and it's supposed to be like in the 70s.
Yeah,
which is
right.
awesome. Like, thankfully, it's not going to be like 85 and super humid like every single game has been this year in New York and around this area. So that, number one. Number two, I know that this venue is amazing. I've played there a bunch of times, and it's so fun, man. That stadium, they really do it right. The fans are crazy. I don't know who they're going to be rooting for. Probably not for us because I don't know, we're the evil empire, I guess. But I know and the third thing I'm excited for is that my family is actually going to be there, and my sister and her three kids who have never seen me play before ever, in person, will be there and cheering me on. So that's really getting me excited too.
Awesome. Best of luck, Ryan. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks a lot, Dan. See ya.
And since there are 2 games for at least 2 of these teams in 2 consecutive days, I figured that we should probably go over the other 2 teams in the other semifinal. For Chicago, it's been a long journey, from the Wildfire to the Union. And for the Summit, they pretty much have done exactly what we could have expected, even though they were an expansion side. And just like with Carolina and New York, well, I could spend the rest of this video just naming off players. For Chicago, you have Pawel Janas, Ross Barker, Sam Kaminsky, Jeff Weiss, Paul Arders, Eli Artemakis, Jack Shanahan, Kyle Rutledge, Charlie First, Nate Goff, Dalton Smith, Jason Valley, Joe White, Nick Pappas. That's 14 names. Jay Frood, Jonathan Nethercutt, Danny Landesman, Matt Jackson, Quinn Finer, Alex Tatum, Alex Atkins, Cody Spicer, Thomas Brewster, Joe Smash Anderson, Mateo Aggi, Daniel Brunker, Seth Ferris. That's 12 right there. And as an expansion side, you best that some of those players that I didn't name are going to have their names be known by the time the weekend ends. And for that Chicago-Colorado matchup, well, I'll need a little help for that too. Now for a look at the other side of the bracket. Oh yeah, we're not just previewing the Empire semifinal, but we're doing the other semifinal as well. And no one better to help me do that is the AUDL's all-time assist leader. That's Pawel Janas. Thanks for joining the show, Pawel.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to start with a question that obviously I know you're not going to answer. You're going to misdirect it. So you overtook Goose Helton, who is still an active player, by the way, in the Central Division Championship win over the Minnesota Wind Chill to become the all-time assist leader in AUDL history. So A, I'm assuming you knew it was the throw. B, I'm assuming you don't care too much about the individual record. But C, I do want to know, in 5 years, how have you gone about and what approach you've had to just taking on responsibility as it comes, but also making sure that you're sharing the wealth with your teammates as well, and kind of taking on whatever comes your way?
That's a very loaded question there. So, I mean, I think when I started with the team in 2017, there was a lot of responsibility to take on. We were not attracting the best talent in Chicago. A lot of players were deciding at the time to play machine and prioritizing the club season. So really, there was a lot of responsibility to take on in the first place. So I think that half of or more of my numbers and statistics come from those bad teams where I was very high usage, high volume. And I think that made me, be able to take on a load, but I don't see myself as someone who takes on a big load now. I just, distribute the ball to our playmakers, and still, rack up an assist here or there just because of, of how we operate as an offensive unit. But, sharing the wealth, I mean, the whole thing has always been to get more of the top end talent to play on the Union and / Wildfire that we were called, before we were the Union. And once, that happened around 2019, 2020, things got a lot easier.
Well, we're going to talk about the youth on the Union later, but as far as that record, of course, you're still going strong. There's no chance in sight that you're going to be done anytime soon. But as far as seeing some of the numbers in the league since you came in 5 years ago, how quickly, the likes of a potential opponent in Ben Yacht is just erasing records, right? The current generation, if you will, for the last 5, 6, 7 years are setting the records, setting the pace as the league has improved. So how soon do you think after you're gone, whenever that may be, do you think your record will hold?
Well, I think to explain what you just said is I think a lot more players are playing more games during the season. So I think in 2017, 16, 15, 14, whatever, players would play 8 out of the 16 games or 9 out of the 14 games or whatever, right? So I think more players are committed to the UDL season and they play, more games during the year, and therefore all the records are getting broken, sooner and faster. I think, with the rate that Jordan Kerr is throwing assists, I expect to be fully, in the history, in the dustbin of history, within 2 or 3 years after I'm gone.
Well, it's funny that you're transitioning to talk about the number of games played, because from someone who only watched about half of your games and regularly had you on in the background, it was hard to keep tabs on who was there and who wasn't this season for the Union. And looking at the names and the games missed, 12-1 seems even more impressive looking at who's missed and what games they missed. Gold medalist Nate Goff played 8 of the 13, 5 for Eli Artemakis, 6 for Nick Pappas, 5 for Paul Arders, 4 for Dalton Smith, 3 for Joe White. Only you, Ross Barker, and Sam Kaminsky, I think, to me, the 3 final bosses of the Chicago Union, played all 13 games. So what was the secret to keeping the ship steady this year as the lineup changed, but the wins were still expected? I mean, yes, it's a good thing to add such talent back into your lineup, right? It's easy to play with Joe Wright, right? Regardless of how many games he plays, it's easy to play with someone like that. But yeah, just keeping everybody focused and the mentality as lineups shifted around and guys' roles changed from game to game.
Well, I think that starts in January and February when, as leadership, we met and we knew that this was going to be the case. We knew we are going to have at least one player on the World Games team. We knew a couple more guys are going to play World Club. And we also knew that some people were going to go on vacation and we were not going to have a full roster. So like we decided to take on a roster of 35 players with the full expectation that we will have to design a system both offensively and defensively that we can kind of plug people in whenever, that foundation was not really set in January, February. It was actually set, 2021 last year. And we have not changed, much about how we operate as a team, as an organization. Maybe our style is a little bit different, but the playbook, the nomenclature, the way we communicate with each other, it's all been pretty much, the same since last year. So really, I mean, that's the reality still for us. I think we're always going to have conflicts. You're not going to get a consistent roster. We're not like the Salt Lake guys or the LA guys that play, on average 10 games. So it really is just about designing a system and having a coaching staff in place that can implement, a system that accommodates that.
Well, I think the narrative going into the season, from the outside looking in, was that losing Drew Swanson, having Keenan North go back to the Alley Cats, it seemed like the narrative around Chicago was, they're losing these pieces that helped them get to championship weekend last year. But it seems like the players that were already around are just taking more of that load, or more of a piece of the offensive pie, if you will. So the players I want to talk about in particular, after playing just one game last season, Jeff Weiss has exploded this year for 35 goals and 23 assists in 11 games played, and all better those marks than the ones he set in 2017, 18, and 19, when you could say that even though he was showing up for games, he was still a bit player and his role has certainly increased. So how enjoyable for you has it been to see him grab a bigger piece of the offensive pie? Because he's not, unlike the young players I'm going to ask about next, he's not really a young player. He's kind of a player in his prime that is now kind of taking on a bigger load.
So exactly to your point, I think I have a lot of things to say about this point. I think the outsiders in general and the ultimate media don't know that much, not to offend anyone out there, but in general, like as a leadership and as a player who's been in the AUDL, I knew that we're gonna have these pieces step up just because of what they were already accomplished on the club scene. So Jeff Weiss, for example, he played the World U23 Championships. He's been on Machine. He's played Machine O-line. Like he's had touches. He's had big game moments. And we've all the local people, all the local commentators, whatnot, we all knew that he's going to step up and have that big role. I guess it was just the outsiders that missed that. No, it's been great. I mean, Jeff Weiss really wants to kind of be in the moment. Like he wants to be the guy. He wants to, sky a pack at the end of the game. Like he's extremely fiery and competitive. And he's also very fast and very tall. So that really helps. And like you said, we had a lot of people left the team, especially on the O-line. So it was just a very natural fit for him to go into that role.
And as far as Ross Barker, I think he, as far as when we're, again, not saying I'm national media, but when I think national media is talking about the stars of the league, when you look at what Ross Barker puts together and what he put together this year, again, in my head, I'm trying to make a list of some of the movers and shakers, and his name should probably be higher at the top there. I mean, how good was he at the beginning and how much better do you think he is today?
He is so good today because he can actually turn, after he receives a pass from me, typically an uncontested under, something that I throw, he turns around and throws a bomb assist to Jeff Weiss, right? Like his ability to convert hucks after a continuation throw That's the biggest thing that he's improved on this year. It's funny because last year we were like, Ross, orange light, not like a red light, like don't throw anything, but like be a little bit more hesitant. And this year it's fully green light, like you have something open, go ahead and just rip it. So he's improved like half of his offensive game. He's transformed all of that to become a real dynamic two-way threat, both with the disc and without it.
And two guys that I think are just improving before our eyes from point to point. Pappas is a rookie. Artemakis is 20. So how rewarding is it for you to already see the next generation? I'm not replacing you just yet, but already see the next generation of the Union making a big impact.
No, I'll gladly be replaced. So Pappas actually was a practice player. So we didn't actually take him on the roster. He wasn't part of the original 32 people that we took on the roster. And after seeing him at practice, after he came back from the University of Missouri in July, he quickly stood out in practice and we elevated him to the roster. So we weren't even expecting to have any contribution from Nick Pappas this year, and anything that he's been able to provide, obviously the 4 blocks in Minnesota, as well as his contributions on the O-line, when our guys were missing in July, that's just all gravy. We were all very excited for him to have a very bright career in Chicago.
And now to compare some of the divisions as we look ahead to championship weekend, I think 10 years ago, right, 2012, 2013, these teams were just trying their best to put their best players on the field and play the best ultimate they could. But now when you watch different games from different divisions, and again, it's been a pleasure to watch the battle between the Union and the Wind Chill, and throw the Alley Cats in the mix there, then the Radicals as well, always give a good fight. And then you have, we'll say, the style out west, where those teams seems like, whether it's the wind or whether it's the altitude or whether it's just the West Coast living, if they're more willing to deal with turnovers. And then in the East, you got just varying games from either blowouts, or you have these tight contests, you have rain, you have wind, you just have that nasty Northeast weather. It's quite a bit especially the first few games of the season. But then when it comes to championship weekend, looking ahead to Madison, it's a place that probably better than almost anybody else for championship weekend. Do you think that the contrasting styles of the 4 teams that are descending upon Madison, you're going to see, am I overdoing that? Does that matter that and are comfortable with the Midwest living?
I think it matters. I think so. Even Colorado, though, they've really reduced their turnovers in the last couple of weeks. Like they were averaging 20 plus turnovers a game, and they're just kind of shooting it. But now in the last couple of weeks, they really fine-tuned their offensive engine, and they're really more stingy with the disc. So I actually don't think we'll have that big of an advantage, because Colorado all of a sudden realizes that there's humidity, that there's wind, that it's Bree Stevens. You can't really just throw 80-yard bombs. I think they already know that. Nutt has played a lot at Bree Stevens, Jay Frood, obviously Dave Weissman. They have players who know and who will obviously kind of take on leadership roles when talking to the team about how you play at Bree Stevens. So I don't think, I think all the styles will kind of converge to possess the disc, low scoring affairs. I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of zones here or there, depending on the weather. I think at this stage, teams are smart enough to adjust, within a couple points, if not, immediately.
And when it comes for Colorado, having Jonathan Nethercutt and having Jay Frood lead that team, but still with a ton of players that this is their first championship weekend. Not only that, this is their first AUDL playoffs. And while, as you mentioned before, a lot of these players have played in big moments, right? Whether it's college championships, whether it's club championships, world championships, a lot of those Colorado players have been through it before. But when you had your first championship weekend, thinking back, was there something different about that first AUDL championship weekend that was different than all the other big competitions you played in before? Do you think the Colorado players might get smacked in the face with?
I think there's more, just more distractions at championship weekend that you can kind of fall victim to, unlike in club nationals or college nationals. I think there's, more media, there's more attention, the stadium's bigger, there's more fans, obviously. But I think once the game starts, it's all the same. You're just playing Frisbee with your friends at the end of the day on a slightly, on a big field with different rules. So I don't think, I hope that the moment kind of overtakes them, and I hope that they kind of blink and we're able to come out to jump to an early lead, and that's like, best case scenario. But I think they will settle down very quickly, and it won't be any different than what they've already been through.
And as far as, I don't want you to give away any of your secrets, of course, here, but we know for Colorado, their defense is built on a team defense, but in particular, right, the legend is Joe Smash Anderson, Cody Spicer. That's a lot of length. So for you as a central handler, as you're kind of putting your offensive game plan together, how do you deal with, this is just for younger players, you can even give advice at the lowest level, how do you deal with guys that you know that, yeah, you have fakes, you can get around them, but just length for days?
Length for days. Yeah, Smash is pretty lengthy. So I've played against Smash and with Smash for quite some time now. So I think I have experience and things to lean back on. So I kind of like know his tendencies. And also there's a lot of footage and film that you can watch to study, about your opponents. But I don't really think it's appropriate for teams at our level to be making offensive adjustments against the defense. I think that's just overkill. I think really I think what both teams and all the teams that are going to championship weekend are doing, they're fine tuning their defense to kind of fit the offense, and not the other way around. I don't think it's very healthy for us to have the second best or the best offense in the league and all of a sudden be worrying about this defender. Like there are lots of really good defenders in Minnesota, and there's lots of really good defenders in Madison and Indy and stuff, and we've been able to handle them. So I'm not really too worried about who exactly is going to be covering me or covering Russ Barker. I think we'll just play it by ear.
And as far as last season, falling to Carolina very much like the Empire did as well. What did it take as far as starting this preseason and getting this season going as it was going along? Again, 12-1, pretty good record. That hunger and that fight is something different than it was last season going for that chip.
Is it different? It's been the same for 5 years. It's been the same for 7 years. I know it's been the same for a long time now. I think for me, I think getting that taste of championship weekend and the misery of losing in that fashion definitely stings. I mean, it stung for the whole offseason. But again, it's a new team, new contributors. We're different. Every other team is different. You can argue that every team has gotten better. This is the best championship weekend ever assembled. So it's just you have to take it point by point, quarter by quarter, and not really think about your past mistakes.
All right, and then the final question here, and you got to give me more than just win 2 games here. So finally, it's a little bit of fill in the blank, right? Chicago Union will win the 2022 AUDL championship in the first in franchise history if fill in the blank.
If the offense converts 80% of their possessions and the defense gets 15 tries at a break. So if the O converts 80% and if the defense just gets 15 chances to convert a break, both games.
Well, wonderful, Pawel, because, Ryan Osgar gave a very, very similar answer that our listeners would have already heard here. So it seems like the minds of these offensive hubs of these teams the game plan is simple. And I think now that stats have kind of taken over as well, you know what it's going to take. You literally know the numbers. And when you count your fingers on your toes, you know what it's going to take to win this. So, Pawel, I wish your team certainly best of luck in the semifinal for certain. And we'll see what happens in that final. But certainly not to play my hand. No offense to the Carolina Flyers, but they got theirs last year. So we'll have to see what happens in that final. But Pawel, thanks so much for the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Most importantly, when the heck are these games and where can you watch them? Well, Friday night you can catch the Union and Summit on AUDL.tv at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by the Flyers and the Empire at 8:30 Eastern Time. Then the next day, that's Saturday, the 2022 AUDL Championship game will take place at 8 p.m. live on Fox Sports 2 or SF2 in your channel guide. So a final congratulations to you as well. We did it. We got to the end of the season. Well, there is 3 games left, and you know that there is still much more to come in those 3 games. So as far as which champion will be crowned in just a few short days, and I know AUDL fans have that opinion, let us know on Twitter or Instagram, but most importantly, as I've said all season, enjoy these games.